Welcome to the Go Find Out podcast. I'm Jennifer Jelliff-Russell, author, speaker, and entrepreneur, bringing you actionable ideas and interviews with awesome women to help you pursue your dreams and achieve your goals. You can find more episodes of the Go Find Out podcast by visiting gofindoutpodcast.com. Enjoy the show and go find out. Welcome to the Go Find Out podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Jelliff-Russell, and this is episode number 24. On today's show, I'm speaking with winery owner Katy Wilson about what it's been like breaking into the winemaking world and starting LaRue Wines as a woman in a male-dominated industry. All right, on to my personal update. Just a quick personal update, as my world is mostly dominated right now by preparing to administer the general election on November 3rd. Woohoo! Gonna be great. The other thing that I'm preparing for this week is National Novel Writing Month, or NaNoWriMo. So NaNoWriMo is actually a nonprofit whose goal is to provide the structure, community, and encouragement to help people find their voices, achieve creative goals, and build new worlds, both on and off the page. And yes, I totally stole that description from their website. The idea behind NaNoWriMo, and I know I've mentioned this on the show before, but is to write 50,000 words in the month of November toward completing a book, right? So while most people work on like the first draft of a book, others split their word count between more than one project or even use the challenge as a way to write articles every day with a total accumulative word count of 50,000 words. The cool thing about NaNoWriMo is that it's a really great community of writers at all levels, from beginner to advanced, right? And these folks are really encouraging and supportive, so it's a great place for a new writer to start. They also provide some really great tools on their site to help you track your writing and sort of gamify the process by allowing you to earn badges for things like knocking out the first 5,000 words or writing several days in a row. So it's kind of nice to earn those badges and makes you want to keep writing. You can also join groups to encourage other writers, and in non-pandemic years, you could connect in person with a local writing community for marathons of writing so many words, or just getting together and having a coffee and talking about your writing. So it's just a really cool way to meet other people in the writing world as well. The best part about NaNoWriMo is that it's completely free to sign up and use all of their writing tools. So it's kind of cool. Personally, I love the daily word tracker, and I've started using that even outside of the month of November to track my daily progress in writing the first draft of books. It just really helps me stay on track and complete the word count that I'm going to complete on a daily basis. This year, I've created a group in NaNoWriMo just for the Go Find Out podcast listeners. So if you've ever wanted to write a book, sign up and join my group. It's free, again, totally free. So I will drop the link in my show notes for you to join the group, but you can also just visit nanowrimo.org and search the group section for Go Find Out podcast. It'll be a small group of about 20 people, so it's honestly just a really great way to get encouraged in your writing. And again, if you are totally new to this, that's completely fine. This is a fantastic way to jump into writing your first book. And if you'd rather put that 50,000 word count toward like articles or like spread them across several projects, that's totally fine too. Personally, though I'd planned to work on book 2 of my steamy romance series, I'm now leaning more toward writing 2 job seeker related books for my other persona, Evergrowth Coach. They're going to be nonfiction, so they tend to be a little bit shorter, which is why I'm planning to do 2 instead of just 1. So definitely check out the show notes to find the link to sign up for the Go Find Out podcast NaNoWriMo group. It'll be a group where you can finally get that encouragement to write that book that you've been thinking about for years. All right, on to the interview with Katy. Today I'm speaking with Katy Wilson, who is making waves as part of the 4% of female winemakers in California. Katy is also the owner of LaRue Wines with vineyards on the Sonoma coast, and today we'll be talking about her journey of starting her own winery, as well as how she gained a reputation for letting the wines speak for themselves. And now she provides winemaking consulting services to other wineries. Welcome to the show, Katy.
Thank you for having me.
I'm super stoked to have you here. Someday I'm going to have to try your wines. I was like, man, I can't get it in time before we interview. So
yeah, I guess we'll have to send it after.
Perfect. So can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I grew up on a walnut orchard in the Central Valley of California. So just about an hour and a half inland from San Francisco. And so I grew up in farming. I always, I learned how to drive a tractor before I learned how to drive a car. And my family has a small orchard. So we did everything ourselves, a lot of things ourselves. Mm-hmm. So planting trees, pruning, taking care of care of the orchard was a part of my daily life growing up. And so when I went to college, I knew I wanted to work in agriculture. That was hands down already, I knew it. And so I went to Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo and started with agricultural business as my major. And my freshman year in Ag Business 101, the professor was talking about different things you could do. And when she started talking about wine, I was like, that's it. I know what I want to do.
Nice.
Yeah. And so for me, it wasn't, first and foremost, it's agriculture. And that's what initially drew me to wine. But also, it has a lot of creativity because you're growing something that you're going to make something out of. With walnuts, you grow them and you sell them and you don't know where they go.
Right.
Yeah. But with wine, you're growing these grapes, you're taking care of the land, you're seeing the differences in the different parts of the vineyard, and then you're fermenting and you're creating something completely different out of it and something that's alive. Like wine doesn't taste the same day to day. And so for me, that was really intriguing. But then there's also a lot of chemistry involved with wine. So you do have to have that scientific background. And there's a huge social aspect to wine as well. So all those things together really drew me in. And no 2 years are the same. And it's really, I started doing a double major right away. So I have a degree in wine and viticulture as well as agricultural business from Cal Poly.
And so it sounds like you had a very different relationship to wine than the rest of us in college. So college years, right? So was it tricky to study wine while you were in college when it sounds like for the most part you were kind of underage during some of it?
Yeah, for the majority of the time where I was studying wine and winemaking, I was underage. Growing up, my parents didn't really drink wine, and they didn't really drink much at all, actually. Now they do,
of course.
thank goodness. They love wine now. They even built a cellar in their house.
Right, that's awesome.
Yeah. But so when I first got interested, they did I have an aunt and uncle who drank a lot of wine and were really great and kind of would let me taste wines with them. And my parents started to let me taste wines at home, of course, with them before I was 21. But yeah, it is hard, like on a daily basis in studying wine and not being able to drink it. We did have a class where we made wine.
Oh.
And you didn't have to be 21 to be in that class for whatever reason. And they let us take the bottles home at the end.
Oh, wow.
It was really funny. Like, what is going on?
That's awesome.
But yeah. There's so much of wine and winemaking. There's a lot to learn about, the chemistry and the growing, like more than half of the battle is growing the grapes themselves and learning about the vineyards. And that was a lot of time I spent learning about that side of the wine industry. And then when I was in college, I also, when I did turn 21, I worked at a tasting room.
Oh, okay.
So I worked at a tasting room in Paso Robles for 2 years.
Nice. So now when you graduated, did you go right into working in the wine industry?
Yes. So I was very driven. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So I had a plan that I wanted to work flip-flop harvests. So you can work 2 harvests per year in the northern and southern hemispheres.
Oh, okay.
So I started out in California, and then I went to Australia, and then back to California, and then to New Zealand, and then back to California. And that was all in the span of just 2.5 years. So
oh, wow.
You can really cram a lot in. It's a lot of work because harvest is no joke. It's definitely backbreaking, intense times where you're working 12 plus hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week for, 2 or 3 months. But it's my favorite time of year. I love it.
It's awesome. And so you're not just like showing up at the end when it's time to like crush the grapes or, get it ready for the actual winemaking process. You're coming in and helping to harvest?
Yeah, so as a harvest intern in the winery, you're not actually picking the grapes. I did work while I was in college. I also worked on a vineyard where you were doing more vineyard work.
Okay.
But once I graduated, when I was working the flip-flop harvest, you actually are working in the winery. So a lot of winemaking is cleaning. So you spend a lot of time cleaning tanks, cleaning barrels, cleaning floors, cleaning drains, cleaning equipment. It's all a lot of cleaning. And then you're doing the actual work of the winemaking. In wineries that are smaller and more hands-on, so we're not talking about million case wineries that are, mainly machine operated and automated. In a more high-end wineries that are more hands-on, cellar hands and harvest interns do a lot of physical work. work. So
Oh.
things aren't really automated. It's not like you can push a button and have wine move from one direction to another, from one tank to another. You have to physically connect hoses and operate the pump yourself, and you're filling barrels by looking in the barrel, and you have your hand on the controller. There's not a machine where you push a button and it fills the barrel for you. So a lot of work is it's very hands-on. A lot, like I said, a lot of cleaning, not a lot of automation.
Right. And so it sounds like some of the higher end wines are more hands-on. And then some of the wines that, maybe somebody such as myself who is not necessarily a wine connoisseur, who buys like $10 wines, like those ones are going to be more automated. Is that right?
Yeah. So for if you're looking at, say, under $20 bottles of
Mm-hmm.
wine, a lot of times those are larger companies who are producing a lot of wine all at once,
Mm.
because that's how they're able to make their margins. So they might have a tank that can hold, like my biggest tank at my winery holds 3,000 gallons. And a tank, I mean, I don't even know, like 100,000
Oh
gallon
my, yeah.
tanks exist. It's like, I've never worked at a winery that big. And so the biggest winery I've ever worked at is about 150,000 cases. And sounds really big, but it's actually considered, kind of a small to medium. My brother-in-law actually works for larger wineries and in the Central Valley, and his daily life is completely different to mine. And the amount of, just how the scale of everything, they're processing the amount of tons in one day that I would process in an entire year or even in a few years. It's very different, but it doesn't make it good or bad.
Right,
It's
right.
just different.
Yeah, it's a very different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, different scale and everything. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and it makes sense that in order to have that price point,
Mm-hmm.
you have to maximize your economies of scale. So you have to have big volumes.
Yes, yeah. And so, no, as one of the few women in the field of winemaking, did you have a difficult time being taken, I don't know, seriously when initially getting into the industry?
Yeah, and it still happens to me to this
Oh
day
no.
sometimes.
Oh man.
Yeah, so it definitely is a challenge. I grew up, like I said, on a farm, and I have two sisters, and my dad has been the best dad in that he always told us that we could do whatever we wanted in life. He's like, don't let those guys tell you that you can't do something. And he would help us to figure out, sometimes you don't have the actual upper body strength to do something.
Mm.
So he would be like, hey, you can use leverage. You can do
Mm-hmm.
this. He would show us how to do things differently so you don't have to ask for help.
Right.
And actually, even if you have the upper body strength, sometimes it saves your back. So I think that going, and knowing how to drive a forklift and all that, for years and years before I actually worked in a winery, that really helped a lot, because when I first started out there, I would, sometimes be one of two women in the whole cellar.
Oh.
Or maybe the only one.
Mm-hmm.
And, the expectation when you're with, 15 guys is that they don't expect you to know how to do anything. And they don't expect you to be able to drive a forklift or do the physical work. So for me, it was definitely frustrating, because you might have this guy from Australia who's big and burly, but's never driven a forklift in his life,
Right.
and is going to pretend like he
Oh
can.
God.
When you actually know how to do it,
Right.
it's like, ah. So one of my first harvests, we had this old dump truck from the 1940s, and it was only drove on property. It didn't go on the main highway or the road, but you basically, once wine's done fermenting, it has, the skins and the seeds and the stems, and they have to get dumped to a compost pile. So everybody had to know how to drive the dump truck. So they line everybody up, everybody's watching, and the first few guys go, it's like everybody has to learn, because it stalls out pretty easily, and you have to make it dump, and it's just a dry run practice. There's nothing in there. And the first two guys go and they stall it out. And I'm like, okay. I was the third person. I was like, I have to do this. This is my time to show them I can do this. So I went in, I'm like, I am going to do this. And I went in and I went doot doot and didn't stall, and everybody cheered, and I was like, all right, now I have their respect.
That's awesome.
But it was kind of ridiculous that I would have to be that in order to gain that respect.
Yeah.
But it's hopefully things will change in the future, but you got to keep fighting for those sorts of little wins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And hey, you're the person out there making the change. That's awesome. And so now, at what point did you start thinking that you wanted to own your own winery?
So actually, when I was at Cal Poly, everybody who goes to Cal Poly, no matter what major you have to write, you have to do a senior project. My senior project, I decided I was going to write a business plan for a small winery. And so I had written a business plan to start a winery back, when I was 20.
Mm.
And it was a dream. I definitely wanted to have my own winery, my own wine. And so I had written that business plan. And then when everything kind of fell into place for me to start LaRue, I kind of took that business plan and I adapted it to be fit for what I was doing. So it's kind of from a young age.
That's awesome. Do you feel like you used a lot of the stuff from that business plan? Because you didn't actually start the business till much later from when you wrote the business plan.
Yeah, I actually did. I mean, definitely the bones of the business plan were what I used, and I of course had to adapt it for what I was doing. But I definitely the structure and like the concepts and a big part of the business plan was that it was small. I wanted to stay a small winery. I only make 500 cases a year. I do most everything myself. My family helps out a lot. My fiance helps out a ton. I've always wanted to keep it small.
And where does the name LaRue come from?
So LaRue is named after my great grandmother.
Oh,
Her name was Fiona LaRue.
nice.
And she lived to be 98 years old.
Oh, wow.
So I knew her very well. She lived long enough to know that I was naming the winery after her.
Aw.
Yeah. And she always told me I could do whatever I wanted in life and to not let anybody tell you otherwise. So when I was thinking of what to call the winery, I decided to name it after her.
Nice. And so we talked that you got some, pushback and negativity for being a female in the industry. Did you get any pushback for then wanting to start a winery at the young age of 26?
Yeah, I think there's always people who say, "Oh, that's not going to work." I had a lot of people say, "Oh, that's not going to work. Oh, you're too small." Even after I was off and running and selling wine, people would tell me that, "Oh, you're never going to make money being that small." And I think that, yeah, you just kind of, for me, I definitely surround myself with people who are not saying that to me. I try to like tune out those other folks and just be like, okay, I'm not going to listen to that. I can be successful. I know I can do this, and I have a plan. They don't know my plan, so they,
Right.
they don't see my books. They don't know how much work I'm doing myself, which is a huge part of why I'm able to make it work at such a small scale. Is like I do all my website updates myself. My mom and my sister are both CPAs, so I do all of my own accounting.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
like a lot of things you can spend a lot of money on. It makes a big difference in the bottom line for sure.
It does. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was speaking with somebody else who is a business advisor, and we were talking about the same thing, that some things are great to outsource if you know that you're maybe not going to be great at it, but some things you can learn to do yourself and survive or really thrive as a small business.
Definitely. And I think that's one of the things I tell people a lot too. I'm like, figure out the things you love to do and do them. And when it comes time to be able to not do something, when you're going to be able to take something off of your plate, figure out the thing you hate doing.
Yes.
For me, when I started out, I was doing everything because I needed to in order to make it work. But now, like the first thing I took off of my plate of hiring somebody is I have a compliance company, because compliance is, with the wine industry, with all the government regulations, is really a pain. So that was the very first thing I was like, okay, I'm getting help with this.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And that's huge. That's a really big deal. You have to be in compliance to be able to sell.
Yeah, totally.
Kind of important. Yeah.
you have to get fingerprinted, everything.
Oh, wow.
It's a lot of, yeah, I know, it's intense.
That is intense. Jeez. And so would you say has been your biggest challenge in winemaking or owning the winery?
I would say, so in winemaking, it's like every year is a challenge. There's so many things that have, you just have to keep persevering and trusting your instincts, because winemaking is like, there's so many different ways you can do things and so many different opinions out there. So you kind of, for me, I follow my gut, and my goal always is to showcase the vineyard in the best, truest form of that vineyard, not to try to manipulate the wine to be how I want it to taste. So yeah, that it's challenging because, the weather is not predictable and you don't know what's going to happen, and every year is different. So you just have to really know how to learn how to adapt and change and roll with the punches with that. And then in owning a business, I would say, like, I think the most challenging part is always being on. Like, when you own your own business, you're always thinking about it. It's really hard to just tune out and be like, okay, I'm going to take a day off and like not think about anything.
Right.
So
Yeah, no, I totally get that.
yeah, so it's hard in that way, but I love what I do, so that makes a huge difference. In that, like, most of the time I don't feel like it's work. There's a lot of times where it's just like, oh yeah, I need to do this, but I'm going to do it, and then that's what I do.
Right.
So
Right. Speaking of all the things that go into, the winemaking process, and, even just the weather and the land make a huge difference. Are the fires also out there in California, and like the smoke, do you feel that will have any kind of effect on the flavor of the wine?
yeah, it has been a very challenging year for the wine industry in Sonoma and Napa counties. We've, of course, with COVID and the shutdowns and everything, were already really challenging. And then we had fires, and we expect to have fires, with the weather that we've been having over the past few years, but none of us expected them to come so early. So they started towards the end of August. So the past vintages where there have been fires, I make mostly Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, both for LaRue and for my clients who I make wine for. I make mostly, a lot of it is earlier ripening varieties. So Pinot Noir and Chardonnay ripen typically, anywhere from a month to 2 months before Cabernet does. So in the past years, I've been almost done harvesting. For LaRue, I've been completely done harvesting, and all the wine is fermented and in a barrel already when the fires were starting, because they started later on in October and November. So this year it really caught everybody off guard, because we weren't expecting to have lightning and fires in August. So unfortunately, I have had a lot of vineyards that I have not picked, and I'm still uncertain if I will have any wine in 2020 for LaRue. So it's definitely really hard, really heartbreaking. The majority of my vineyards do have crop insurance, which at least helps to cover their farming costs. But and there's going to be some programs through the USDA, the FSA, for farmers who didn't have insurance or who didn't have very good coverage to be able to get some money. But it's really hard. Some people are still picking, and every vineyard is different. So there's some that didn't get as affected by the smoke as others. Unfortunately, a lot of my vineyards were really, really in that wind direction where the smoke got them pretty quickly. So it's tough, and there's not a real right or wrong answer with what to do when you're in that situation. And there are a lot of people who are picking, and their wines they definitely could have great wines that come out of this vintage. So it's a hard year all around. There's a lot of research going on, and people are really learning a lot about smoke taint and how it works and how it affects the grapes and everything. So hopefully we'll get even more research, and hopefully we don't have to deal with a year like this again where the fires come so early.
And now you mentioned a moment ago that you have clients that you do winemaking consultation with. Did that kind of start organically, or did you kind of decide it was something that you wanted to do and kind of started putting yourself out there?
Yeah, I actually did decide I wanted to be a consultant. I knew that was kind of my dream, as far as like being completely self-employed and working on LaRue, but also making wine for other people. I really do love that, because like for LaRue, I'm very focused. Like, it's Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and it's from a very specific area of the Sonoma coast that's just about 7 to 10 miles from the ocean. And it's an area I really love, and I love the Pinot and Chardonnay that come out of that area. So it's like this little pocket of the Sonoma coast. But for my clients, I'm making over 20 different varieties from all over Sonoma County and to Mendocino County and Santa Lucia Highlands. And it really kind of puts everything into perspective. So I'm not so one-dimensional, focusing only on my own wines. And I'm able to it's more creativity of being able to do a lot of different wines and a lot of different styles. And to me, it's exciting, and it kind of keeps me busy. happy.
I was going to say, because you do focus on small case, so you said 500 cases,
hmm
do you find that if you were not doing the consulting, that you would have too much downtime?
I don't know about that. I guess I would probably fill it with something
Yeah.
else. Probably be like have time to do gardening or something. Right now, I don't have much time to do much anything besides making wine, but I love it, so it's all
Yeah, yeah,
good.
nice. So now your wines are currently getting scores of 95 or higher, which is awesome from the top critics. And LaRue Wines is doing well as, like we said earlier, an ultra premium brand. So what is really the next bar of success for you that you're kind of setting your sights on?
I think I really love where I'm at now. I love the people I make wine with now, and I know that all of my clients are growing, so that's a continuing challenge because it's like more and more vineyards
Mm.
and stuff. So I think that side of it is what will be the growth side is the consulting, and whether it's just the clients I'm working with now growing or taking on new wineries. But for LaRue, I just love like what I'm looking forward to is really seeing, my vineyards that I'm working with are all around 20 years old right now. And like to even seeing how they've developed in the past 10 years, because I started LaRue 10 years ago, I'm looking forward to seeing how they develop in the next 10 years. I think they're going to just get better and better. And like just having that connection to those vineyards and the land and being able to see what happens. Like that's what I'm excited about.
Nice. And what habits do you feel that you have that have helped you to be successful in operating your winery or your consultation business?
So I would say, it's really funny. When I was homeschooled until I was in seventh grade, and I really did not like it. and and I was, growing up, I was like, oh, so mad at my parents for that. But now looking back on it, being homeschooled, if you can do well in homeschool, that means that you have some self motivation. And my mom wasn't super strict as far as being like, okay, you need to do this right now. She would kind of let us, if I wanted to do spelling for the entire year, she would let me do that
Hmm.
like in a month, and then do math next or whatever.
Right.
So I think that kind of really helped out with being self-employed and starting your own winery, because so much of it is self-motivation.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's not anybody telling me where I need to be or what I need to be doing, or even a guideline of what you should do, because there's so many different directions and different things you have to take care of, that I think that having that kind of foundation really helped me to be that kind of self-motivated person to just get things done. I do create a lot of lists. I write things down. It definitely helps me out too, because when you have so many things to remember, it's just like,
Yes.
make lists.
Yes.
And then pick away at them. I write down a whole big list of what I need to do. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to get like 3 things off this list done today. And just like, because it can get overwhelming as well. Like, especially when you're starting your own business, there's so many things. And I have a lot of friends who have also started their own wineries and such. And it gets overwhelming, and it's like, just pick away at it. Don't think about the whole picture. Like think about one thing at a time. And it really, really helps out.
Yeah. Do you prefer like paperless, or do you have any like apps that you prefer to use?
For me, I'm old school paper. I use scratch paper, so I'm not wasting new paper, but I always have like so I have a binder where I do have my clients separated and in a whole binder where I am able to write notes. And then I have just like a piece of scratch paper for my daily lists and things. So
Gotcha.
sometimes I do have on a lot of times I also just make an email draft, and I just leave it and I put the subject line as list, and I
Mm.
type in things there as well too. So kind of a combination of different things, but definitely I like the physical act of crossing something off a list.
Yes. It is very nice to be able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's satisfying.
Yes, exactly.
Done.
And what do you think that you would have missed out on had you not started LaRue Wines?
Wow. Yeah. I think I wouldn't be as good of a winemaker as I am now. I think starting LaRue and having some success before I started consulting, like that kind of opened those doors a lot.
Hmm.
And being able to make so many different kinds of wines, I think I don't think I would have been able to do that. If I hadn't have started LaRue, I probably would have been working for one winery and making, a few different varieties. Yeah. And I think, just being independent as well, like being able to make my own schedule and yeah, be self-employed. it can be freeing.
Yes. Yes, it can be. What advice would you give to others who are interested in starting a winery?
I would say definitely work from the ground up and try working in every aspect of the industry. I think a lot of people, even when you have gone and gotten a degree in winemaking, and you don't have to have a degree to be in the wine industry, but even people who have gone and gotten a degree, and that's the only experience that they've had, and they're like, okay, now I'm a winemaker, and it's like, well, you really need to learn how to do everything to really grasp the whole situation. So
Mm.
for me, I always have gone on the philosophy is like, I'm never going to ask an employee or somebody who I'm telling what to do. Like, I'm not going to ask them to do something that I've never done myself. So that's why, like, I had the experience of working in the vineyard, and I know what it's like to work, 60 hours a week with no overtime, because that's the law. And the law is changing, but it was the law in California.
Mm.
And you work, for minimum wage. I did that for a whole season, and it was backbreaking work. And you really kind of understand the people who you're asking to do. When you're asking somebody to go through a vineyard and do something, you know what that means.
Gotcha.
And the same as like working in the cellar and cleaning a tank and cleaning the drains and, taking care of the pumice bin and all of that sort of stuff. Like, when you're asking somebody to do something, that you've done it and you know what the work is. And I think just it makes you a better winemaker if you know the whole experience, and you're able to kind of have that foundation. And I think that's the best way to get into the industry as well, is to work a harvest. It's a really great, we always need people during harvest time, and we do get people, some with no experience and some with a lot of experience, and it's kind of, you have that mix, and it kind of is great, because then people wanting to get into the industry are able to kind of jump in that way, and you have some people with more experience who can kind of help out with them. And it's a really good community industry. So we definitely refer people back and forth, even still to the Southern Hemisphere, to wineries I worked at. I send my interns, if I have good interns, I'll send them down to New Zealand, and vice versa.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, where can we learn more about LaRue Wines?
We have a website, LaRueWines.com, LARUE. And then we have an Instagram, is also LaRue Wines. And we do have a Facebook page as well. And you can also find us as LaRue Wines on there too.
Very cool. And when I was looking at the page earlier, it looked like I could sign up for a wine club. Is that right?
Yeah, so we have a wine club that we have 2 releases a year, in the fall and the spring. So if you go to the website, you can see the wine club, and there's also the mailing list. So if you're not ready to join the club, you can join the mailing list and get an offering of the wines as well. We also do tastings, Instagram live tastings that we've done, and we've actually pinned them to our Instagram page. So we have some on our IGTV. You can go back and kind of watch us tasting and talking about the different wines. My fiance David and I have done that, and we have different guests on. So it's really fun. We have, different sommeliers, or some of our vineyard owners have been on. So it's a great kind of way to kind of see and learn about the wines.
Yeah.
And if you don't have Instagram, we also have a YouTube page, LaRue Wines, where you can see those videos as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today, Katy.
Thank you so much. It was fun.
It was a really fun interview to chat with Katy and hear about some of the challenges that she encountered while starting LaRue Wines and getting into wine consulting. Something that Katy said that really stuck with me was how she recommended that those starting a business recognize what they like doing in the business as well as what they don't enjoy doing. And when financially able, to consider outsourcing those things that you don't love to someone else. I would also add that you might consider outsourcing those tasks that you know you're not good at, or investing in professional development to become better at those tasks. I tend to be a really frugal person when it comes to my business, and I always hesitate to spend money. So if you're a tightwad like me, sometimes it helps to remind yourself that spending money on the company can be a really sound investment, and it can actually lead to exponential growth for your company. Outsourcing a task that you hate will free up your time to focus on something else in the business business that you actually enjoy doing. Remember that time truly is money in a business. So if you look at it from that context, then outsourcing the task to someone who will not only do it better, but also complete that task more quickly than you can actually save you money in the long run. It also frees you to focus on other tasks that you might be better at, which would be a better use of your time. The other thing that Katy discussed was the importance of recognizing that goals don't get accomplished in one fell swoop. Big goals happen steadily over time through continual effort, right? Goals are achieved one step at a time, or as Katy says, in bite-sized increments. Looking at your big goals as smaller, actionable steps can also keep you from becoming overwhelmed. Personally, I needed that reminder this week. I've been focusing on building out my Evergrowth Coach brand by creating courses for job seekers and building a presence on YouTube with free videos. But it can be really overwhelming to look at the big picture. So working backwards, I wrote out all my big goals and broke them down into smaller, bite-sized pieces, rather than just getting stuck at create engaging YouTube videos as a goal, which is a pretty big goal and has a lot of moving parts, right? I now have smaller, more actionable daily goals of things like research how to create engaging YouTube videos, create a space to record high-quality videos, and write the script for a general job seeker tip video, right? Or video number 1. Seeing these bite-sized steps makes my goal a little less overwhelming, and it means that I'll actually get more done than just staring at the goal of build a YouTube channel for Evergrowth Coach, because that's just overwhelming for me. What about you? Do you have a big, hairy, audacious goal that just seems overwhelming right now? How could you break that goal down into smaller, more manageable, bite-sized pieces that you could take steps toward each day? I'd love to hear what your goals are and how you've broken them down into smaller, more manageable steps. You can tweet them to me at GFO Podcast or DM me at Go Find Out Podcast on Instagram. I'd also love to hear what you think of this podcast. Hearing from you, listeners, lets me know that the content that I'm creating is actually making a difference for you. It's also great to hear that people are actually listening. So feel free to reach out to me at GFO Podcast on Twitter or at the Go Find Out Podcast on Instagram. You can also subscribe to the Go Find Out Podcast on your favorite podcast directory. And if you've been enjoying the show, definitely leave me a review on Apple Podcasts. All right, that's it for today, folks. Join me next week when I speak with fly fisher and Maine guide Evelyn King. You'll hear what challenges that she's had to overcome to get into the world of fly fishing. Until then, go find out. Thanks for listening to the show today. I hope you found the information beneficial and that it helps you tackle your own Go Find Out goals. You can find more episodes and the show transcripts at gofindoutpodcast.com. You can also let me know what you thought of the show by tweeting me at GFO Podcast or follow me on Instagram at Go Find Out Podcast. That's it for today. Now go find out.